All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're very pleased to have with us today Nicolas Levrat, the Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues. The Special Rapporteur briefed the Third Committee of the General Assembly earlier today. The Third Committee, as you know, is the one that works on human rights. He will have opening remarks, and then if we have any questions, he'll take those. And just to note that the Special Rapporteur, and this is the same of all Special Rapporteurs and independent experts, he has an independent voice from the United Nations. Special Rapporteur?
Yes, thank you very much. As was just said, we, as independent expert or special rapporteur, have a mandate from the UN, from the Human Rights Council, but we speak on our own behalf. We're independent. And my mandate is about minority issues, so I'm trying to first map all the minority issues that exist in different parts of the world, and second, try to improve the situation of minorities. And I just gave a briefing to the Third Committee of the General Assembly, and there are 3 points I would like to share with a wider audience. The first one is that minority issues are not very present in the UN system, both for historical reasons. Actually, minority issues historically has been much linked to the failed League of Nations. So after 1945, there was not much appetite to go back to minorities, and universal human rights was supposed to replace specific protection for minorities, but obviously it is not enough. So this is why in 1992, the General Assembly adopted by consensus, a declaration of the rights of persons belonging to national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities. But apart from that, you don't find much mentions of minority, even though they are a very serious issue, not only as regard human rights of persons belonging to minority, but as regard societies as a whole, society as being inclusive places, society as being stable and not in danger of having parts of the society, some groups, minority groups, claiming respect for their rights and thus destabilizing the system. So, for example, in the SDGs, which play a very important role in current international community, there's no single mention of the word minority. In the Pact for the Future that was adopted this year, same situation. Even though research shows that there are many things being done for minority communities, but it's never pictured as a minority issue. And that's my second point. I think understanding and caring about the situation of minority is not only a human rights issue, but very clearly a peace and security issue. And especially in peace-building processes, we know, unfortunately, that many conflicts are kind of recurrent. It's in the same place that the peace is broken again. And if in the peace-building architectures, the peace-building effort, there is no specific place given to minorities and the possibility for them to fully enjoy their rights without discrimination or with as little discrimination as possible, then you create a dangerous and explosive situation for the future. And the third point, beyond this, I would say, very general institutional aspect, is that in political life, persons belonging to minority needs to be respected, need to be included in the community. And very, very often, too often, we see political leaders in campaign scapegoating minorities. And this cannot be accepted, especially in my role as Special Rapporteur on minority issues. 3 weeks ago, I wrote to the Indian government with a long series of quotes during the campaign by the current Prime Minister of India, asking Indian government to explain what they will do to make sure that this does not happen again, because it is contrary to the obligation of India as regards human rights. And naturally, it's not my role to interfere in political contests, in elections, but I will write to the US government after, and whichever US government is being elected, after tomorrow, not immediately after, but soon after, because I heard many things that are really scapegoating on minorities, and that cannot be accepted as regards the commitments, human rights commitments of the United States of America. So I will also ask for explanation and hopefully guarantee that this will not happen again. So this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm saying, and I hope that it will help the situation of persons belonging to minorities.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur. Questions? We'll start with Abdelhamid, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Abdelhamid Sayam, from the Arabic Daily, Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have a few questions. First, your definition of minority. There are, as you know, different types of minority. A minority that is, it was at one point majority and they became minority in their own country. Mm-hmm. And there are immigrants who move to another country, they become minority. And there is economic minority that they could be flourishing, but still a minority. So how do you, where is your focus? Mm-hmm. And the second, I have another question. Regarding Palestinians who were left in their homes in 1948, they were majority, of course, and they were ethnic cleansing. They expelled 800,000 Palestinians. And the Palestinians who were left there, about 150, they are indigenous to that land. They didn't come from Europe or from Far East or from anywhere. But they became minority in their own land, and they were treated very brutally. There were military martial law applied to them for 20 years, and then they are discriminated against. As you know, so many reports about apartheid. So how do you treat them? Do you treat them as a minority or a national group or what? And that's my first two questions, and I might have follow-up. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. Two important questions. On the first question, definition of minorities. In international law, there is no legal definition, positive law definition of minorities. And we have to live with that. In 1948, when the General Assembly of the UN adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the same resolution, there is a small paragraph about the fate of minorities, in which they say, so it's the member states at that time, well, the issue of minority, the situation of minority is so complex and so different in each country in which it takes place that we cannot have a provision in the Universal Declaration. So it is non-defined. The only element of definition that we can have is that a minority is less than half of the population. If you're more than half of the population, you're a minority. You're not a minority. Now, the second element, I think, is that minorities that need to be protected are minorities which are discriminated against. I could find minorities that don't need protection. For example, billionaires are a minority. They're less than the entire population, but they don't need protection. They're not discriminated against. Actually, they're usually discriminating against others. So there are some minorities which are numerical minorities, but not discriminated. So it's the two parameters. You have to be less than the half of the population. So, for example, when we had this very terrible situation of apartheid in South Africa, nobody used minority. It was apartheid. And actually, it was the largest group of population that was discriminated by a minority. So there is no strict definition, and I think we can live with it. In the coming years, I will do a report on minority issues, because the mandate is on minority issues, and I think the important part is not to define minorities as a group, but what are the issues for this group. And I think it is very different in different parts of the world. So, for example, migrants, as you mentioned, Europeans are trying very hard not to consider them as minorities. even though in some countries, migrants and children of migrants have been there for 2 or 3 generations, so they are a minority, and sometimes they are discriminated against, so yes, they should be protected as minorities. It really depends on different parts of the world, and then there are also different definition of, let's say, minority groups. We have indigenous population, which is not exactly minority, and we have people. And I'm coming to the case of Palestinians. Actually, there is no definition of people either in international law. Interestingly, the first idea of people came from here, the US, when they say we the people, and you can look at it, it was a bunch of people which were not linked by, let's say, common origin, common language whatsoever, so there was no ethnic definition of a people and so on. It was really a political act, and it still is. So I think any group can decide to be called a people. Now, some groups have, let's say, stronger historical claim to be a people and to be recognized as such. We know all the decolonization process and so on. For the Palestinians, it's, for my mandate, a very delicate issue. Because, as I said, if they are considered as a minority, then they're included to a larger polity. Which one? So, yes, there can be a minority in Jordan, there can be a minority in Lebanon, there can be a minority in Israel, but Palestinians altogether claim the right to be considered as a people and to have their own state. So, as you know as journalists, words can be used, instrumentalized. So, for me, dealing with Palestinian issues as a minority issue runs the risks that it is used against them, like saying, okay, after all, you're just a minority, you're not a people claiming self-determination. So it is very delicate, technically speaking, for me to intervene on Palestinian issues. And if you take Gaza, they're not a minority, except if you consider that Gaza is part of a larger polity, but it's not the case. So, unfortunately, because of this, let's say, siloed approach in international relation and international law, I would not, in the current situation, consider in general Palestinians as a minority. It's a people claiming self-determination, and it's been quite largely recognized. Now, if at some point, and let's hope it will happen, there's a settlement and there is a Palestinian state, probably in that state will not only be Palestinians, there may be minority there. And maybe there will be Palestinians left in other countries because maybe they don't all want to join this new territory, which would be their country. Yes, there will be minorities. But for the time being, it's politically delicate to deal with them as a minority.
Stefano?
Thank you. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York Ital Press. Just to make sure I understood what... So you, your mandate is not for those minorities that would like, for example, we can think about the Kurds or others, independence, so they want basically a state or some different status of what they are in a certain country, but is more about people, citizen of a, they can be citizen or migrants, but they live in that country. They are not looking for self-determination. They want to live under the law and the rules of that country, but they need protection because I'm just thinking, for example, that LGBTQ plus community, they want same rights like everybody else. Is this correct? That your mandate is toward this, the protection of these people?
Yes, it is correct. And as I say, it's not for me to decide. For example, the Kurds that you quote, they can either be considered as a people, and they claim the rights as a people to have self-determination, which does not necessarily mean their own state. They could decide in a vote on self-determination, you can decide voting to remain in the states in which you are. It is a way to self-determinate. Or you became a new state, and we know that the Kurds are divided in or living in several countries. So for the time being, it's not only from one country they would like to emancipate, it's from several. So again, it's for the Kurds to decide whether they want to be treated as a minority in Iraq, as a minority in Syria, as a minority in Turkey, and so on. And so, yes, then they want to be citizens which are non-discriminated in the country in which they live. One thing that many people don't understand is that non-discrimination is not only forbidding to treat differently persons who are in the same country, but if persons are in different situations and you treat them the same way, this is also a form of discrimination. So they will be calling for some differentiated rights from the majority of the population. But being a minority, by definition, you accept to be a smaller group in a larger polity. So for the Kurds, again, it's for them to decide. They can be minority in Turkey, they can be minority in Iraq, and so on. And then I deal with that in my mandate. Or they claim, and it can be the same person. They can have two strategies. But as far as my mandate is concerned, I'm not here to work for self-determination. That's, as the name indicates, self-determination. It's for them to decide.
So if you, my question is at this point, because you mentioned that you were going to write at one point to after the U.S. elections
Yes.
to whoever comes to power, I guess when you say that means that there is already some problems here before
so.
even the election. Yeah. So can you specify, in particular, in this letter that you will write anyway, doesn't matter if Trump or Harris gets elected, can you tell us, and I'm sorry, I arrived 5 minutes later, so maybe I don't know if you mentioned before, but what are the specific issues that you have with the United States on the respect of minority rights?
As I say, the scapegoating of persons belonging to minority groups is something that is contrary to human rights obligation of states. It's not only in the US, but it is quite strong in the US. And as was said before, there is no specific definition of minority. So I cannot rely on saying, okay, this is exactly the group of population, but I guess you've heard, like I did, there is a lot of scapegoating, hate speech about defined minority groups. And again, my role is not to write to this or that government. I'm writing to the government of the state. So again, whoever is elected, and I will ask if measures will be taken to make sure that this does not happen again. I will not write before the election, first because it's too late, but also because I'm aware of this difficulty from a while, but it's not my role to interfere in political process. That I understand. But then I want to be sure that states respect their obligation under international law. This is what the UN mechanisms as regard the protection of human rights are.
Abdelhamid, I'll come to you. Let me go to Dulce first. Yeah.
Thanks very much. So you're saying your role is not political, but have you spoken out about the scapegoating in the U.S. political presidential election campaigns?
No, not yet. I didn't exactly say my role is not political. I say I don't intervene in a political process within the countries, especially when they're ongoing. But certainly, minority issues are framed as a human right. So the right of person belonging to minority, but everywhere it is a political issue. Everywhere. There is no single country where minority issue is not a political issue. So again, my role is not to interfere in domestic politics, but yes, by qualifying and putting into light some behavior that are contrary to the human rights obligation, yes, it is a political role.
Well, I mean, as an American, I've sort of been astounded at the silence from the UN overall on the speeches and remarks by, obviously one candidate in the presidential election. And I know that, it's always political, but there has not been, maybe Volker Turk has actually said something, but nothing specific. So it sort of seems like a loss to not speak up about the way former President Trump has been talking about women, blacks, minorities, you name it. There's a long list.
Yes, I've heard. And you're right. I didn't. Well, first, we do not necessarily and not only do public communication. We also write to governments and ask them to answer and to try to find solution together. So this is the rule of the game. When we write, they have 60 days to answer, and then we can make it public. We can make a press statement also immediately, press release. But sometimes we start working with them and trying to find, let's say, constructive solution. I don't know yet, because I have not yet written. I don't know which answer I will get. Sometimes we get no answer. Then, yes, we go public and we condemn. But again, the purpose of my mandate, and I guess all mandate, is to make sure that the human rights of persons are as good as possible. So I know there will not be perfect solution, but I'm just trying to make sure that we can improve the situation of persons belonging to minorities.
How effective is scapegoating in a political campaign? I mean, you obviously see it all over the world, but how effective is it for a candidate to say and do these things? Thanks.
That I don't know. And again, I'm not interested in how candidates fare in political processes. I'm interested in protecting persons belonging to minorities. The problem with these speeches is that it creates in society form of understanding that these persons which are in different situations because they belong to minority groups, and you rightly also pointed out that it can be intersectional, it can be women from this group and so on, it can be older women, young girl and so on. So yes, it's very complex, but the thing is that these persons which are public persons, they have a responsibility to keep society as an inclusive place, or they take the risk to, well, generate violence, and that will not benefit the human rights of persons belonging to minorities.
Tell me.
Thank you. I have a few also questions. I want to hear from you some success story. If you could tell us that we did this and it was responded to positively by that state or this state. And how do you see the Aroma people in Europe? Are they improving their status as a minority in different countries? And I want to raise the double standard of international community in regard to minorities. The Turkish Cypriots, they were a minority in Cyprus, and they were discriminated against until they split, and they are having their own state. And no country in the world recognizes them except Turkey. Mm-hmm. But very similar case is Timur. Mm-hmm. They were a minority among the large Muslim community. And the international community led by the U.S., they were a robust movement to send troops there and to allow them to go for a referendum. And the referendum came out in favor of separation, and the country became independent in 2002. And if you compare Cyprus and East Timor, you will find similar Same thing with South Sudan and others. And I don't want to go to Kashmir and many other places. But how do you see that, how the behavior of international community in dealing with these minorities? Thank you.
Okay. To start with the Roma, because you mentioned them, and then I'll come to Cyprus or Timor-Leste and Timor, yeah. The Roma are, actually, you find Roma and other related population, and even unrelated population, which are not having a sedentary mode of life. And that creates many difficulties in European societies mostly. So there is discrimination against these persons, not only direct discrimination, but also many indirect discrimination as regards access to public services, to social services, to education, and so on. So there is really a very difficult situation for Roma in most countries where you find them. Also has to be said that inside the Roma community, there are also practices that do discriminate against, for example, female compared to male. And in many countries, we see because some Roma population do sedentarize, and then usually girls stop attending school at 12, 13, and it's not a decision of state authority, it's a decision of the Roma community. So it is actually extremely delicate and interesting, challenging intellectually, because usually human rights is a right of an individual and the states. But here we have a three-level game, because we have the individual, we have the community to which the individual, the minority group, belongs, and the state. And that is a principle that is accepted as regard minority issues, is that every person who objectively belongs to a minority group has a right to choose whether to be treated as belonging to the group or not. Meaning that this person may decide to try to renounce to its minority identity and to integrate in the dominant part of society. And naturally, these individual rights also need to be protected. So sometimes it is difficult to make the balance between the rights of the group to keep its identity, its lifestyle, and so on, and individual rights, because some lifestyles of some groups do create discrimination within the group. So Roma, it is very unsatisfactory, and actually one of the strange things about Roma is that when Romania entered the European Union, and maybe you know a little bit about European Union, one of the fundamental principles is the free movement of person. And then we had Europeans that were traveling all the time, so they already had free movement. And then it creates problem with the system, very hard to understand. Naturally, and that brings us back to part of the definition of the minority, they're not socially integrated. They're discriminated against. So this is why this is a minority which deserves protection, and not, again, jet setters that are moving around Europe. They're probably a minority, but they don't need protection. They're not discriminated. So yes, Roma is a very complex and difficult issue. Now about, yes, these different situations and which group of population becomes to be a country or not. Yes, it is a political process. Again, we were talking about Palestinians earlier. It's for very political reason that there is no Palestinian state. And there is one state in the Security Council which makes sure it doesn't happen. You may remember that Palestine had a bid to become a member of the UN not so long ago, well, a decade ago now, and it was blocked. So, yes, it is political. Now, who decides what? You know, I'm a single individual. I don't have any economic power. I don't have any military power. So it's not me who decide. But I can try, working together with other human rights defenders, to push for the right of persons whoever they are, and in my case, persons belonging to minority. But yes, there are double standards, it is known. Or let's say no, it's the same standards, but interpreted very differently.
All right, I don't see any questions in the room. I don't see any more questions online. Then thank you very much. Again, just to reiterate, the Special Rapporteur has a voice that is independent from the United Nations. Special Rapporteur Nicolas Levrat, thank you very, very much for being here.
Thank you.